Agapiti fili, calimere calispera apotorent mont cacalos irtate sena coma.net API review. How'd I do, Eric?
Nailed it.
Yes. I cheated. I used the script today.
Oh, in Klingon.
Kapla! That, as far as I know, that satisfies everything in Klingon. Okay, we have a lot of issues on the backlog today. We may or may not get past the second red one. We'll see. I don't know that anyone was here to represent the memory cache issue. At least I didn't see Mark in the meeting. So can anybody speak to this one, or do we skip it again? All right. Well, then first up is .NET Extensions issue 5123, introduce logging, sampling, and buffering.
Okay, thank you. So could you please click on this link in the first sentence?
Okay. For future reference, please always put the API proposal in the top post because we're too stupid to do that.
Okay. So yeah, this proposal includes two features, basically logging, sampling, and logging buffering. So yeah, let's start with logging sampling. We propose to introduce like a few built-in samplers. One of them is a probabilistic sampler, like which samples in or samples out logs based on some probability, like randomly. And also, yeah, all of these built-in samplers will inherit from this abstract class logger sampler. And this is public. Yeah, it means users will be able to create the custom samples with custom algorithms. And like to make a sampling decision, they will use this struct sampling parameters, which provides parameters such as log level, category, event ID, and log state. And this all works to begin with. It will work in .NET extensions in the extended logger class. In the runtime, it will check all registered samplers and ask each of them about the sampling decision. So if a log record is sampled out, it means it's like dropped immediately and like lost forever. If it is sampled in, it means it will be logged as usual. And that means that users will be able to come up with some custom algorithms to decide what they want to see in their logs. For example, like often they don't want to completely disable some information logs, and using this sampling feature, see, let's say 10% of information logs, or like 1% if they want. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so then if we scroll down here, we propose a bunch of extension methods to register.
Actually, I do have a question on the sampling parameters. So something like the, which one was it? Okay, log level. Is that an exact match, or is that a minimum value or maximum value? Like everything above this level, or or conceivably these could be optional, right? I don't care about the level, or I don't care about the category.
Yes, all of them are optional. So like,
So should they be not nullable?
Sampling parameters is just saying that a log item was logged that has
okay.
these
Yes,
properties.
yep.
All right,
it's
so
not
what I'm
anything
asking
about
should be
the
the options
algorithm
instead.
for sampling. It's just saying you logged something and it had this initial state.
Yeah, okay, so what I'm asking is really goes into the options, not here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, maybe it'll become apparent later, but if this is metadata on what got logged, why don't you just have the trace message, which would have all this data already?
Because the APIs that log things pass this data as parameters. Like there isn't a struct or something that encapsulates it.
There's no log message type.
There's a no, like if you want to look at the API for like iLogger, you'll see that it just takes a variety of parameters. There is a state, that's sort of the closest object-like thing, which is that read-only key value pair list down at the bottom of the struct there. But all these other ones tend to get passed as parameters, not as a self-contained struct.
Okay, I guess my two pick a fork questions are then shouldn't this match, or shouldn't this just justify creating a log message struct that says nothing to do with sampling? Like this middle thing of sampling is defining a struct for the first time feels the most wrong to me.
Yeah, but you're about 15 years too late to apply it elsewhere.
I'm just if we're making one now, it could then be reused by the next feature. Instead of we make this exact same thing but call it profiling parameters. Like, just asking questions. But
I think it's fair that
this feels the most
if you rename
wrong.
sampling parameters to log record. Yeah.
Also, just to be aware, there is some layering issue at play where actually, Vinny, this is which assembly is this planned to go into?
I think Microsoft extensions, telemetry or diagnostic telemetry.
Okay, so not into Microsoft extensions logging abstraction. I mean, presumably.
No, I mean the abstractions have only the interface for the buffering, but all of this stuff will be in the higher level.
Right. I was just saying, along Jeremy's suggestion, if there were to be something that was just a general purpose struct that encapsulates data for a log, presumably we would want such a thing in the lower level assembly, not in a higher level optional assembly. I'm not saying we go that path, I'm just saying because currently this is in a higher level optional assembly, that would be one thing why we probably wouldn't want to put a general purpose struct for logging there.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I have a draft PR for it, and currently it is in Microsoft Extensions Telemetry Abstractions assembly.
Yeah, which is in .NET extensions.
Cool.
Yes, .NET extensions.
Okay, so there's the issue of potentially maybe this should go in a lower level, but even if it doesn't, the name sampling parameter to me is not great because this is really it's a log record, and you're saying so it's independent of sampling from that standpoint. It's not parameters to sampling.
It certainly, yeah, you could call this thing log record. I think that would be reasonable.
Is there anything else that uses the record suffix?
Or I doubt it.
Because I guess you're excluding the actual message here.
Whatever name we create, I think we're creating it for the first time because there isn't an existing class or struct that represents this package of parameters.
And note, yeah, this doesn't have the message.
Yeah.
So it's not a full log record.
Right. Yeah, a full log record would also have a delegate formatter and a exception object.
Maybe a timestamp or something.
Yeah, and the scopes.
I mean, is there any reason to not just put all that on here?
For now, we don't need it so far. So
See, I mean, if what you want is to say this is the data that sampling wants, then maybe this would be sampled record. Or
It's a record to be sampled.
I mean, is it?
Well, so you're in the pipeline. You need to make a decision whether you're going to sample a particular record or not. So now you create one of these objects and you say, should this be sampled? So you're accumulating the state to ask a sampling question.
Yeah, it's the input to a sampling algorithm.
yeah, which is sampling parameters will make sense at that time. Right?
I guess to me, when
Actually,
when I think sampling parameter, to me that's more along the lines of what percentage is being sampled, and so it's parameters and options kind of blend in my mind for this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, you could certainly add more properties to it to represent the full content of a log message. It's likely those things wouldn't get used in the sampler, so you'd be paying, I don't know, an extra couple nanoseconds or something to throw more state into the thing, and then it wouldn't get used. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it is a tiny cost for something that probably won't get used.
okay, so how about sampling record? Like the parameters, it feels like it's more the input to the sampling choices as opposed to.
How about if you a sampling input?
I'd be concerned that record would be confused with the language feature in C# or F# or another language.
Yeah, that's what I was originally starting with, but it looks like we have a lot of things suffixed with record, event log record.
I like sampling input. I mean, this makes sense.
Just a bit more background information. So OpenTelemetry has sampling of traces or activities. It's activity type, and they have this exact name sampling parameters. Again, it is public. It is for making decisions about sampling. So they have the same name.
That's useful input, but it is not a thing that says that must be the name in .NET. We have multiple people in
Certainly.
this meeting who were confused by this name, therefore this name is confusing.
If we were picking between record and input seems clearer to me. To me, record sounds like it is the output of sampling, like you got finished and now you are recording the result.
All right, shall we go with input? We have much more to review.
Sure. I mean, I'll also come back and say that you're too big to be a struct, but we can light that bridge on fire when we get to it.
This struct is passed by reference, so and we don't want allocations in this path.
It's right here, passed by value. The only
So that's an error.
thing that takes it is
Okay,
passed
so
by value.
so that's an error. So that's an error. Right. Evgeny, that should be by reference.
Okay, I will check. I will check that. Yeah.
I recall
It's a
Jeremy
read-only.
doesn't.
But it's a read-only struct, doesn't it? Implicitly get passed by reference.
No. It's a
No?
struct. It's passed by value.
But it's read-only, so
That
that's
doesn't matter.
optimized.
That just means all the members are read-only and you don't have to make a copy if you pass it within. Chat has pointed out that there is a strikingly similar structure called log entry of T state. And in fact, if T state was I read only list of key value pair of string object, I believe you would be. No, because there's an exception and a formatter hanging off this one, so it's not 100% the same.
Yeah, that one. Let me. I have a memory that's. What is that?
Yeah, so it's an exception
Oh,
and
yeah,
formatter.
All right, we did create something for this. I'm trying to remember where it's used, but.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that may actually be suitable here.
And note there's a buffered log record. I created that one.
We may want to use log entry T state.
Oh, it's also a struct.
Oh wait, that's why we don't do it. It's in Microsoft Extensions logging console. It's an implementation detail of one particular console logger.
I mean, you could move it down. Nothing about the type name says it's related to console. Nothing about its namespace says it's related to console.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's involved in moving it down. If that's straightforward, I mean, I think the shape of the type is reasonable. It's just its location that is currently problematic. I've never moved one around before, so I don't know what's involved.
But why would you need to move it around? It's an extensions logging abstraction.
No, that's the namespace. The assembly, that
also.
defines it is extensions logging console, I think.
Huh. No, the doc page I'm looking at says the assembly is Microsoft Extensions logging abstraction.
Oh, what? All right, sorry.
Could be the doc page is wrong. I don't know.
No, you're probably right. It's probably I'm misreading something.
So I think as is, it's an
Okay,
usable spot. It just has state that we don't care about in this context.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I misread. It was used in console, not defined there. So yeah, that seems reasonable.
I've left a note asking if you can just reuse the existing one.
So we'd have to pass a fake formatter.
No, I mean, like literally past the formatter that was supplied. We wouldn't have to fake it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the exceptions, not the formatter zone.
I mean, like we have all that data because the user gave it to us when they tried to log the message. We just keep passing it along.
Actually, you could imagine sampling on exceptions, saying if there is an exception, don't sample.
Yeah.
But what about the formatter? I mean, like it would be confusing if you are sampling and getting this parameter, I mean, or these things.
I would just expect samplers to ignore it because it's not very useful for sampling. But if you
Well,
really
I don't know.
wanted,
If you really wanted to, you could format the string and have a regex
Yeah.
against that string.
right, if you want a really low perf sampler, you could do that.
But yeah, but which string? I mean, like because this is not the message, not the log message. But uh, anyway, I mean, like I'm seeing like yeah, I mean, like log entry will be a superset of this sampling parameter, but it's still about like if anybody implementing sampling can get confused if see more stuff there. I mean, that should ignore. Yeah, I mean, like if everyone is fine, I mean, like to have this, maybe you can document it. I mean, this would be fine to use the log entry.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anything has to be ignored in that structure. It's just some things are more likely to be useful than others, and some things will be more performant to use than others.
And I think we'd be using log entry of iRead-only list, right? So not tstate in general.
I mean,
Right, so the should sample API would take a log entry record of iRead-only list of string comma object.
yeah, I mean, I think that, like, concretely, assuming that is our T state at the point we call it.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the explicit assumption of the existing sampling parameter. It's an iRead-only list of string comma object, or object comma string. Which one was it? Yeah, string comma object.
All right. Should we continue along?
Sure. Where would you like to be?
Oh, is log entry I-equatable, or is that a requirement?
Currently, it's not I-equatable, but we can make it I-equatable if we need to.
So Evgeny, why is it I-equatable? Or
So it's not a requirement. I think I was seeing some warnings from analyzers.
oh, because it wants the structs to be
Yes.
Okay, so that's not an issue then if you use log entry.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the analyzer not complaining about log entry. It's a struct, so
Or it's suppressed over there, yeah.
Yeah, well, we have log entries that's defined in runtime, right? We don't have those analyzers, those specifically turned on because they end up having pretty high false positive rates with our designs or with things we've already shipped.
yeah.
All right, so what should we be looking at?
So for that one, the recommendation is to use a log entry, right? As we decided.
So
That is the consensus I heard.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can scroll down to this extensions methods. So for trace-based sampler, it's just one of kind of built-in or standard samplers which we want to offer, and it will use, or like it will apply the same sampling decision which was made for the respective activity. And it will be especially useful for people who use OpenTelemetry or OpenTelemetry tracing and sampling, because like sampling decisions will be consistent between traces and logs. Then probability sampling, again, it's a built-in sampler, and I think most people will use this one, and it is kind of I think will be default choice for people, and it is pretty simple. You provide probability, and based on this probability, sampling decision is made. And then down below, add sampler method, it is like for registering. Could you scroll down a bit, please? So yeah, so one add sampler method is for registering just a delegate, like when you don't want to create a class, and then another add sampler method for registering your custom logger sampler implementation. So that's about extension methods.
So I got a couple comments.
Yeah.
In that first method, can you scroll up, please? You have the XML comment is malformed. Where did I see this? Anyway, just something to, oh yeah, so right in the middle of the screen, according to the provided probability thing. So that's a bug fix. Keep the summaries to one sentence and put the other stuff in the remarks so it looks good in IntelliSense. And the third one is add probability sampler should probably be add probabilistic sampler.
Okay.
Aside from that, looks good to me.
I mean, for what it's worth, the dot comments don't survive this meeting. So. As in, the final notes don't have them. So.
But I wanted just to make sure the source code is correct, the original source code.
Sure. It's virtuous. I'm just saying it's not a thing I'm going to write down because I've already deleted the comments. All right, so probability to probabilistic. Didn't hear any objections, so I wrote it down.
Okay.
So earlier there was the comment that you thought that the sampling parameters were being passed by ref, but here you use them in a func, which means that they're not being passed by ref. So if you want them passed by ref, you need a custom delegate for that. Or you can say that they're passed by value here, but passed by ref to anyone who they're passed by value in the delegate, which then the implementation of this passes them by ref to somebody who was too lazy to write a class. But just the comment that earlier you thought it was passed by ref, this is obviously passed by value.
Indeed.
Yeah, maybe we can create a delegate for that to pass by ref.
Yeah, because now the struct is even bigger with log entry.
It's worth noting that this is kind of the same issue that we hit with things like system text JSON, where it took a lot of very, very careful planning to allow it to be a struct and correctly passed everywhere, and users still get it wrong. And that's why the framework design guidelines have the guidance of don't have big structs.
Yes. And zero allocation is sometimes a virtue, but not always. And the GC is pretty good, especially at short-lived objects.
Right, and if users are going to mess it up and they're going to end up doing by value, they're going to introduce copies that are likely far more expensive than the allocation would have been. Allocations aren't that expensive. Having lots of throwaway allocations can be. Copying is always expensive, and copying is where most of the perf issues actually come from.
But if you're reusing an existing type, then
sorry,
it is what it is.
I just don't. I don't see that. Copying 40 bytes is like an order of magnitude cheaper than inducing garbage collections.
No, it's not. The GC is one of the most efficient memory allocators, and it is often more performant for allocating memory than malloc and C is. We have explicitly tuned it to be that way. Copying 40 bytes is going to incur the cache line contention and everything else, and that is an order of magnitude more expensive in terms of the cycle cost. And when it's repeatedly done at every single boundary, it adds up to significantly more, especially when you can do things like pooling or other alternatives to reduce the cost and the frequency of things like freeing.
Does this matter here, though? I mean, if the APIs are being defined to take ref and we already have a struct, or is it relevant?
Well, it's the same consideration as system text JSON, where we explicitly went through all the steps of making allocation free, and we still have users who get it wrong and introduce accidental copies and make mistakes with it. And it's a question of, is this a scenario where the risk of users using the API wrong is enough to warrant the gains you get from when it's used correctly?
But who are the users here? Isn't most of this infrastructure that sits behind actually, like the 99% cases, developers aren't actually interacting with this stuff, right? It's like a few pieces of infrastructure that we end up implementing and shipping, and like most developers aren't actually constructing a new log entry or passing these things around. And when they do, the signature accepting a ref helps them to get it right.
That's correct, I think.
Just to short circuit the debate about GC versus other
but
stuff.
If most people aren't expected to write a sampler, then I would recommend abandoning the one that takes a delegate at all. Just if they're going to be like 12 samplers, then they can all just write the class.
That's a fair point.
The delegate would only matter if you expect that like the average person's going to call it, and they're like, man, it's a one Boolean function class. Why can't I do it as a delegate? But if that's not the case, then I would get rid of that one altogether.
Yeah, I don't think I have high expectations that lots of people would write custom samplers.
All right, let's nuke it. We can add it back next year if we need to.
Yep, less is more.
And also just generally agree with Stephen's statement. I think the overwhelming majority of the calls to the sampler are like, that'll be infrastructure, and the overwhelming majority of the sampler implementations are probably going to be our default ones.
Okay, for this overload of a probabilistic sampler, where does it get the probability?
From configuration.
Okay. Fair enough. Is there some sort of default or some sort of throw if it doesn't find it? I don't know any of the conventions for extensions, so if you think that's a stupid question, that's why.
Well, actually, I'm wondering now. So the convention has typically been that we would have Like the add probability sampler takes the builder and then takes an option, a struct, and then when you take an I configuration, it's going to look to configuration for that as a copy of that struct. So now instead of a struct, we have explicit parameters. Was that intentional, Evgeny, or like we could have had a probabilistic sampler options type?
Sorry, probabilistic sample options.
That contains the probability, the log level, and whatever else is on the right side of the screen that I can't see it.
I think we have it. Can we please scroll down? I think we should have it somewhere. Yes, it's here. So it contains the rules, and yeah.
So what's gotten out of the I configuration?
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds like it's just one rule basically that it's getting. Okay.
No, it's a list of rules, so you can provide it via configuration.
But the API that takes it explicitly is just defining one rule in line, right? Yeah.
This one, yes, yeah. Like typically, like we think typically that people will use one rule. If they want like something more complicated, they will use configuration or custom sampler.
I'm not liking the lack of symmetry. Our normal pattern has been that you can either provide the options as is in your code, or you get the same thing configuration. And now they're not symmetrical in this world.
I mean, if you think that just specifying the p-value is going to be a common usage, like that's a fine extra overload, but it seems like the suggestion is that there should be an overload taking the options.
Yeah. Or a list of options, whatever you called it there, list of rules.
Well, because the list of rules was wrapped in the options type.
Okay, yeah.
Seems fine to just have an overload that takes the options, in case you'd like to produce that without having gotten it from configuration.
Yeah.
And I assume
if anything, it's convenient for testing.
I assume that we're renaming that probability to probabilistic as well.
Yeah.
And regarding options, so are you suggesting like probabilistic sampler options object or action of it?
Like yeah, normally I guess it's an action. Yeah, we have an action that returns an option. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have your convenience, basically your convenience overloads.
Not the value?
Yeah, the pattern is always that we use everywhere else is you pass a delegate that returns an option.
And what's it called? Options factory?
I don't remember anymore.
It's called configure.
Oh yeah, the delegate is just called configure.
Okay. Weird. Okay, and should the trace-based sampler overload have, or method group have overloads?
Like we are not aware of any like options or parameters for it as of today, so we decided not to introduce more overloads.
And can you add both at the same time? Trace-based and probabilistic? Do they compose?
Let me see.
You get one. I don't think they compose.
So you'll get an exception if you do both?
I don't recall. You either get an exception or one of them just clobbers the other one.
Okay, clobbering doesn't seem like a great strategy, so I would add an
Yeah,
exception
I
to the
think
docs and throw the exception.
I agree with you. I think exception would be the preferable behavior. I just don't remember which one it is right now.
Like I guess it'd be invalid operation exception probably.
I mean, I guess it would be because the state of the pipeline doesn't accept a new sampler.
Yeah.
Just that particular exception type gets overused, so when I hear it, I have to think about, does it actually apply?
Yeah, you made a call we didn't want you to make in this state.
The chat suggests that within the Microsoft extensions DI space, clobbering is the normal behavior. So, be consistent.
All right. Silent failure it is.
I'm not saying I like the answer, I'm just saying that consistency is always the starting point. Okay. Our general framework design guidelines say collection-based properties should not be settable, but if extensions options have different rules, then so be it.
I think it's because, like in particular, we need to support configuration, and then some binding from it doesn't work if we don't use list here.
I thought don't we use iList?
Well, I don't remember, but I checked some types, but yeah, only list worked. Maybe iList will work too, but not sure.
Okay, so just look at all the other options to see we have a pattern. So it's either list or iList. Oh, it says
Your default probabilistic sampler filter rule is to include everything.
Yes.
No sampling. Yeah.
Well,
Whatever.
depends on if you consider the verb sample to be sample in or sample out, I guess.
Yeah.
So
everything is sampled in. Yeah.
Okay. For your constructor that does define things, do you not want to use defaults for the optional parameters? No is fine. I'm just surprised to not see them.
Yeah, so like event ID and log level, yeah, you could put those equals null, right?
Right. That.
Just for my edification, and sorry if this was already covered, I joined a little late. Ooh, at what level is the filtering happening? Like if is it filtering out entire activities, or is it filtering at a log, in like each call to log each entry? It's probabilistically filtering out each of those. I'm wondering if you end up with like consistent groups of log messages, or if you end up with sort of this sporadic thing across them.
So if you use this trace weight sampler, it will be consistent because it uses activity is recorded or activity recorded property.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you end up with this like nice grouping of them, and you either get the whole group or not.
That was one particular sampler that gives you those groupings. Then there's a different probability sampler, and this rule is part of that thing that does not give you those groupings. So basically, the behavior you get depends on which sampler you choose to use.
And you have to opt into one of them because by default,
Yes.
nothing is sampled out. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So should we put the equals null on those parameters?
Yeah, we can do that. Yep.
I'm ready.
Okay. The general suggestion is that once you have, it's either 2 or more than 2, but since you have more than 2, it doesn't matter. Defaulted parameters that we add an overload that only takes the mandatory parameters, but this type may be so rarely used that it may not matter.
I'm surprised that the probability is has a setter. So this can be changed dynamically as the application is running?
No, you're right. I mean, I agree with you. I'm not sure why it would have a setter. I think we should just get rid of it.
Yeah, it is either a miss or again it was because of this high configuration binding issues. I will double check. Because it's like value type. I'm not sure if it was possible to bind it from configuration. Like, I mean, if it's not provided in configuration, then probably binding would fail.
But it's a mandatory constructor argument.
Setters for the rest.
Yeah. And like nullable int is a value type. Nullable everything's a value type.
I mean, basically, if the configuration binder requires property setters in order to set the values of these things, then I would think we would need setters across the board, or we wouldn't need setters across the board. It does seem odd that we would only need one setter.
Yeah, that's what drew my attention.
Okay, yeah, I will check that.
All right, so that's it for sampling.
Yeah, if there are no more questions, yeah, let's proceed with buffering.
I think we glossed over the thing at the top, so just popping back to that. You wanted to change should sample to be passed by ref. And does anybody have any other comments on the type?
So why is it an abstract class instead of an interface?
Yeah, if you is this going to be supported in the .NET Standard too? I mean .NET FX.
I think it was also kind of inspired by OpenTelemetry.net. They have abstract classes for sampling and other features. And interfaces are, yeah, again, less flexible if you want to extend it. I mean, in case of .NET Framework.
Is the goal to have those open telemetry types directly provide an implementation of this? In which case, having this be an abstract class might be challenging because they might already be burning their base class.
I don't think there was a goal to, at least not like directly plug in something from open telemetry here. I mean, maybe someone would want to build some adapter, but even there, I'm pretty sure all the sampling in open telemetry is trace-based rather than log-based.
Okay.
I don't have a strong opinion as to whether this should be abstract class or interface. I think we should do whatever the normal, API guideline would be. So if the guideline is interface, that's fine.
I mean, it comes down to basically, do you think you're ever going to want to add more? Because if we ever want to add, what's that? Sorry.
You said add more methods?
Yeah, if we ever wanted to add more methods, we could add virtual methods.
Yeah.
If it was an abstract base class, but if it's an interface, as long as we're supporting that standard in NetFX, we can't.
Yeah.
But if we think this is a done deal and we'll never add anything more, an interface would be fine as well. And typically, because of the extensibility argument in the core libraries for system, the guidelines are generally start with an abstract class and go to an interface only if you have to. But Microsoft extensions, which started life sort of higher up in ASP.NET, has generally done the opposite and started with interfaces and made them abstract classes if it sees extensibility being a possibility. So we're sort of in a middle ground here. We should do whichever we think makes more sense given what we expect the future to be.
Okay, so the only real downside to having an abstract class is that you can only have one base class.
Right.
Otherwise, you have to use containment instead of extension. I'd go with the abstract class just so that we have the flexibility on .NET Framework to extend this in the future.
Fine by me. The extensibility seems unlikely, but also the base class thing seems unlikely. So it seems like two tiny things.
Yeah.
Okay. I went ahead and took the substitution of the new struct to the old struct, and then because it's no longer a parameters type, I wrote down entry as the new parameter name.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yep, guess we're at buffering.
Okay, yeah, so for buffering, situation is slightly different. We don't want to offer this feature of implementing custom buffers, for example, but we will have only internal standard buffers, global buffer, and down below you will see HTTP request buffer. So it is global buffer for let's say normal logs, and the HTTP request buffer for logs which are coming when there is an active HTTP request or there is a HTTP context available.
Well, so let's just give it a little more context on what the idea of buffering is here. Applications are logging stuff. It gets accumulated in memory into a circular buffer, and if nothing bad happens, this data just gets thrown out. But at some point, if an error occurs, you can retroactively say, "Oh, let me send the last 2 seconds of log data out, so I can see around the bad event." But in normal operation, you don't need to send that stuff out, and you're saving on COGS.
Yes. So, and again, just to remind that iBuffered logger was introduced and like proposed by Martin like 6 months ago, I think. It was introduced in .NET runtime. And this logging buffering API is taking advantage of iBuffered logger interface. Yeah, again, so
Another piece of context. So the reason for iBuffer logger, if you guys recall, was the fact that somebody's calling ilogger.log and produces some state, and instead of processing that state immediately, we need to keep it around for later in our buffer. So the contract's a little bit different. We need the timestamp to keep the timestamp at the point things were logged, and a few other things. So the job here of this thing is to take the incoming log records and turn this into a buffered log record that we keep around. Right.
Yeah,
And
and
the context.
logger provider is the one which is implement this interface. I mean, to support buffering or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we have a couple of extensions for global buffer. Again, we support configuration and also another overload for parameters in place.
So why is the log level called out separately from the configure callback?
Let me see.
I was going to ask the same thing.
I think it's like to simplify defaults. Like for most users, they will just set, let's say, log level debug or log level information, and we'll use default global buffer options.
So the log level override what comes back from the configure method?
Like I could understand if you wanted a log level only accelerator, but I don't understand what it means to say you'll get an options and then you also took a different level.
Yeah, I agree. I would separate those. So I presume the global buffer options has a log level in it, right?
It has rules like buffer filter rule type.
And the buffer filter rule has the log level.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so I tend to agree that I would separate those two, have one that just takes a log level, and then have one that takes the configure method, and then they're separate.
Okay.
And then you have one that takes a mandatory configuration, one that takes a mandatory log level, and then the third one takes an optional delegate, or should it be a mandatory delegate?
That would be a mandatory delegate, I think.
Okay. So all calls to add global buffer need an argument.
Yeah. Otherwise,
Again,
otherwise you're you're buffering everything.
It could pull configuration from magical ether state, so I have to ask.
Well, and if you want to simulate that behavior, you provide an empty delegate that returns a default option. So. All right.
Okay, for options, we have a few properties to control buffering. Suspend after flush duration, it means that, like, if you trigger flush, most likely you like buffering to pause or to stop for some time, and that's in this property you can provide this value. And then
does anyone feel, I guess other than me, that global buffer options is a complicatedly overreaching name and it should be called something like global log buffer options?
Is your concern that it would conflict with something in a different namespace, maybe?
Yeah, just because it's a very broad name. Yeah.
It doesn't bother me to insert, the word log there. It didn't occur to me before your concern, but
because these are just
biased,
three very broad words glued together. So none of them are really locking the domain.
I could see maybe like if you have a single, program.cs file or whatever that has a main method where you're configuring everything, putting log here might make that distinct from other things that you're configuring. So yeah, I could see the benefit.
Yeah, it's like, because if you just see like global buffer options, you're like, oh, is this like tuning array pool shared? It's like, no.
So is it logger, or logging?
Log is what I suggested. I'm open to any of them. Of course, that'll bring us back to somebody had a question on logger sampler of, is logger sampler the right name?
Yeah, we're not sampling loggers.
Right.
And similar here, we're not buffering loggers. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So it feels to me like it is a log buffer, and you're specifying the options for the log buffer. And so then
it's buffering. There's more than one buffer. So it's global log buffering options.
Okay. Do we want to?
Yeah. So let's go with that.
Do we want to bounce back up to logger sampler and rename it to log sampler? Or message sampler, or trace sampler, or...
Okay, well, if we go with buffering, then this should log. So this is a sampler.
Okay, sampler is correct,
logging.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this would be logging sampler.
Yeah. Which, because English is ambiguous, could either be a sampler that logs or a sampler of logging. But people will figure that one out from context. So, is everybody okay with logging sampler? Okay, and
I gave a thumbs up. Don't know if you can see it, but sure.
I can't.
Okay, thumbs up.
And then I heard no objection to global log buffering options. I don't think that the extension methods need to be renamed, but if we want to change buffer to buffering, we can.
I would go with buffering. Because again, it's implying I'm adding a global buffer. That's not what's going on.
Okay, so are we renaming this extensions, the extension method holding type to global buffering logger builder extensions? Something about that name seems wrong.
So it would be global log buffering builder extensions. I think.
But it is logging builder. Should be logging builder extensions.
Yeah, and then what did I say? Global log buffering builder extensions. Global log buffering options. Yeah, that works.
But the extension work was logging buff builder.
Builder extensions.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's on the builder. Yeah.
But it's called logging builder here. So should the type have?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Global buffering logging builder extensions.
Yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, that's
Of course, nobody ever types this name, but
right. I mean, but what you said makes logging, like to match the logging builder,
Yeah.
that's the extension. That's the this parameter.
global buffering logging builder extension. Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
We're getting close to world record symbol length here.
Okay.
But like you said, nobody types that thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. And so I heard the suggestion that add global buffer becomes add global buffer ring.
Yeah.
I heard no objection, so I wrote it down. Okay.
All right, so we were looking at the options below. Precise and bytes.
So this size and bytes, two properties to control buffer size, like to limit its size.
So if a log record is bigger than the max log record size in bytes, then you just log it. If it's more than 50K, it's just going to be logged, or just
Let me see.
Does that flush the buffer ahead of it so it gets to jump the queue, or?
well, there's a comment there on that goes off to the right side of the screen that explains the behavior.
Yeah.
Won't be buffered. Okay, well that's still ambiguous. Does that mean you discard it or you log it?
No, we don't discard it here with buffering. So yeah, it will be logged.
Okay, so let's fix the comment, please.
Okay.
Is 50K a reasonable number here for as a default?
50K for logging.
And by the
is
way,
also-
as a computer guy, I object to the fact that it's not 50 times 1024. Just saying. I guess I probably would default more to like 4K kind of thing. 50K log records is abusive.
But we just wanted to prevent some like intentional or non-intentional some overflows.
How does it
But,
know what a byte count means?
We do estimations, just calculate string sizes of log state, like basically of all strings in a log message. Yeah.
You can imagine when it's buffering, it is serializing everything. And as part of serializing, it can determine how much data it produced by serializing it.
Right, but so it's assuming JSON.
I mean, honestly, it's an internal implementation detail what the serialization format is. So this is intended to be, the more efficient we get at serializing, the less things would hit that limit. It's not JSON. It's like just some internal collection of strings.
Yeah, it uses a formatter that we saw before to serialize stuff. The formatter itself is format whatever.
That's part of it.
That
But
formats
there's
it to
more.
bytes.
The formatter creates a string, but that's not the only thing that gets included in the serialized result. I mean, it currently it reduces it to the .NET, like a list of .NET strings, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
But there's all the T state, the category, the level, all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, if you're being heuristic-y, then I just wonder if the in bytes suffix is
Yeah, and
like,
also passing in bytes looks.
because if you're just like it's max
Well,
log record size, and people are like, "What's the unit?" It's like it's Mobo bytes, or no, maybe byte, no,
Well, do you want to just
Bogo
tack
bytes.
on
There we go.
approximate max log record size in bytes?
I mean, I was actually suggesting shortening it. So
Oh well.
I like the in bytes suffix because it does give an overall indication of about what scale you're working at. And if it is just an approximation, like that could just be in docs, right? There's no need to put it in the API name.
Yeah. Yeah. So get or set the approximate maximum size.
yeah,
I mean, we keep having this, in bytes and kilobytes, whatever conversation every time one of these APIs comes up. Like maybe that's an argument to make an actual like data transfer type that is, bytes or something.
yeah. I mean, mine was just the like, because once you're calling it in bytes, then it's like, well, if I look at what then didn't get buffered, or the memory usage of the buffer, and it's like, but I said your max buffer size is 1 megabyte, and you violated it. So as long as the docs say that these are using an approximation of the message size, then what you're really getting here is a scale. That if this is taking 1/1000th of your buffer, then you're just going to send it along, or whatever it is that you do if it's too big.
Is buffer size in bytes the right name, since the description says it's the maximum size?
I am questioning even buffer size in bytes, because like if we have the maximum record size in bytes, so the buffer size should be number of records, not the total size. Right?
Well, no, it's a maximum record size. It's not the record size. Most records are going to be less than a K. So we want to constrain the total amount of memory that this thing can use in an absolute way.
But can't you restrict it by the count instead of size, memory size?
Well, but then so if the average
Okay.
the average record is probably going to be less than a K or thereabouts. So in 500 megabytes, I can store a whole bunch of those. If instead I'm limited to the number of entries, and my entries can go up to 50K, I'm going to have a much smaller total number of entries, even though I have the space, because most entries are only 1K.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, but I think there is a discrepancy in the name of the property versus the comment. So it gets or sets the size of the buffer in bytes, no maximum. I understand that internally the implementation might actually not allocate 500 megabytes and might be smaller and grow gradually, but yeah, so I guess it is the maximum size.
Yeah, it's like a capacity of buffer, right? So it's
Yeah, but again, you could decide to pre-allocate it, or you could not.
Okay, so stick the word max in front of that, and I think we're done. Max buffer size in bytes.
Okay.
Then it's consistent.
Um, can you explain the suspend after flush duration and why 30 seconds sounds like a reasonable value?
Uh, just well, I don't think I can like reasonably explain 30 seconds, but or are you asking like why this property is needed or?
I mean, what is it? And assuming that this is for like things on the web, if you're flushing at every request, 30 seconds is several infinities. Um,
Uh,
so
yeah, probably you're not supposed to flush it on every request, but only like if you,
When bad things happen.
yeah, like if there are like too many bad things are happening together, or like too frequently, maybe. So you when you flush the buffer, probably you don't want to buffer more logs for some time because you want to observe like what is happening actually. You
Yeah, so
probably
the
want to
mental model
stop
I have
buffering.
is the mental model I have is time marches forward, and you're not logging any, you're not sending anything to the back end logging wise, and then something bad happens. Now you're gonna you because you've buffered it, you're gonna get a snapshot of the last 30 seconds, and because this error happens, you're also going to say, give me the next 30 seconds. So now you have a full minute of what's going on in the service to figure out what happened. And then if nothing else bad happened, then the buffering goes off and you're back in silent mode. That makes sense?
ish. I guess I'm confused as to why the retention of logs decision is now being moved to the instance instead of the aggregator, but um, sure. I would have expected. I would have expected that buffering meant you were just reducing the amount of times that you were pushing to the aggregator, and that when the buffer was full, you would auto flush. Not.
No. This is a circular buffer intentionally to throw stuff out. So if I'm healthy, I don't need to report every time a freaking user hits a key for whatever. So you log for what you expect you might need in case of emergency, and if everything goes smoothly, throw it out. Don't send it to the back end and save millions of dollars. That's the objective here. So for context, right? So this is in high scale services, telemetry becomes a dominant cost, and we find that the majority of the stuff that's in our that's costing us hundreds of millions of dollars a year, majority of that stuff is never looked at.
Right.
So this is a way, the sampling and this buffering are ways to reduce the amount of data we send to the back end to save us on COGS.
So maybe this will make more sense if we talk about the rules first. So if a thing doesn't match the rules, is it discarded or sent on immediately?
What's the
it is
yeah? What's the polarity?
I missed the
So
answer.
what's the polarity, Evgeny? What do you do right now?
just log it immediately.
Wait,
Okay, so this is, you would say, for example, you want to buffer verbose logs, and then
Yes.
something went wrong, and now you're saying, take the however much verbose or now out of order verbose messages that I have, and push those in case we caught what caused this error, and then now we also want to just collect all verbose messages for the next 30 seconds, and then go back to reduced logging.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not
That's
about
the general.
buffering. This isn't about just minimizing the number of times you open the connection to the aggregator. It's this is
Throwing stuff out.
to intentionally throw stuff away, but to be able to have a look back.
Yeah. And not just a look back, but it also, the fact that logging is happening in the code means that now through configuration, I can control what's going on. And I can just say, look, this is a pre-release version. Just log all the time. No buffering, turn that off. And when production scales up and I'm confident things are working, then I can enable buffering without changing my code.
Okay. Yeah, I had the wrong mental model, which is why the suspend made no sense.
Yeah. All right, shall we go look at the filter rules? All right, so like we had above, do we want to put default equals nulls on these parameters?
And do we want to add some log and some ings anywhere?
So should this be
Should-
log buffering filter rule then?
And also, isn't it the same as log entry again?
No, so this is not a. This is
But
the
it
other
would-
side of things.
But it contains the same things as log entry.
But this is about matching against the log entry. It's going in the other direction. So
Oh,
log entries are coming up, and then we have this to describe how to match against it. I think.
Are your callers going to understand what attribute matching means?
It's just a key value pairs, so it's like strong equality, if I may say.
But it's the if an entry is missing the attribute as opposed to has it with a different value, does that match? Does that like?
Uh,
I'm just
No,
well, is someone
it's-
going to understand the match criteria for them? Is the real question.
Yeah, I think you need a little more docs there.
yeah, docs, yeah.
Yeah, so this has no notion of or semantics and semantics, or it's just very simple matching.
And then I assume your implementation of the options is if any rule matches, then it's held in the buffer.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Should event ID be an int? It's not the event ID struct?
Again, so I think I had issues with configuration binding here as well. Event ID like is not bound.
Because it doesn't have the right serialization support.
Yes.
So above in the sampling, it was also just an int?
Yep.
Yeah, event
Indeed.
ID, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I think that's a problem because the logging generator generates an event name that corresponds to the logging method. And that's the more convenient identifier that the developer would use. Whereas the numerical event ID is just some random number that is not particularly stable and or meaningful. So if you can't serialize the event ID as a struct, then I would at least put both the event name and the ID throughout, so that you can use the event name.
So is that add string or nullable string event name next to everywhere we have
Anywhere.
event ID?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there is a event ID type that logging defines. That's like a struct that's the pair of, an int and a string together.
Correct, but Evgeny's saying that doesn't work through iConfigurations
Okay.
stuff.
Got it. Sorry.
Okay, so chat has said that, at least there's one suggestion from chat, that they were equally as confused as I was that buffering was not, or that buffering is what it is. And they've asked, should there be alternate names such as anomalous event logging or healthy log skipping or something of that nature. Because, yeah, it certainly doesn't do what I thought it does.
What if it was called circular buffer? With the word logging somewhere. Circular log buffering, logging, circular buffer. Implying that when stuff runs out of the buffer, it's not flushed, it's a circular buffer, so it'll keep overriding.
Right, but you're naming it for what it is as opposed to what it does, and so I think the thing with like anomalous event logging is trying to name it for what it does, because you use it when you want to be able to gain a retroactive view to an anomalous event. I'm not saying it's a great name, but it's the idea of naming it for why you want it as opposed to what it does.
Well, no, so that's the opposite. I think to me that's a. So what we want is to save money, and because we're afraid of missing information, we have to have this buffering. That's basically it.
I mean, I think in other places what we're doing would be called tail sampling.
Well, except you're already using sampling to mean do you throw it away or not?
I mean, tail sampling is a form of throwing stuff away.
Fair enough.
The tail it's like a little bit of an industry jargon term, but it just means there's head sampling and tail sampling. Head means you decide immediately at the time the thing was generated whether you're going to throw it away, and tail sampling means you keep it around for a while and then you make a decision later whether you want to throw it away. And so everything we were doing before was head sampling. We decided immediately whether we wanted to throw it away. And now this one is doing tail sampling. It's keeping it around in a buffer, and then later it's deciding if it should throw it away. I'm not necessarily saying that I think we should rename all this stuff tail sampling. I'm just putting the term out there so people can at least think about it.
Oh, to me, this is it can be solved through documentation. One comment saying what this is actually doing.
In a way, but I think of the optimize for the code reviewer as opposed to the person hunting through docs to find out whether or not they want to call the thing. Seeing we're adding buffering, you're like, okay, we're adding buffering. Like that, I wouldn't read that at all as we're adding. Sometimes messages are in a holdback to be either ignored or eventually uploaded. Like,
I do agree with Mark. I think circular buffering, at least to me, like circular buffering very much implies stuff gets overwritten.
Fair.
There we go, breaking the lengths record again.
Yeah, I mean, we can think about that for a bit while we look at the other things, but but I do feel it is that someone else shared my confusion. So I'm not sure that buffering is the best name for these.
Yeah, unfortunately, we already kind of committed to those names because there's iBuffered logger that was added to support this feature.
And that already shipped?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but buffered logger can be used in other scenarios if we need to enable other scenarios, not just the buffering, right? Not just sampling like this one.
Correct. But the main reason
So-
it exists
so-
was to support this.
Yeah, I understand, but we
Yeah, you're
should.
right.
Yeah.
I do think iBuffered logger is generic enough that like it's not tied to circular buffering at all. You could use it in sort of the scenario that I think Jeremy was envisioning, where nothing
Yeah.
gets thrown away and it's just a matter of like pooling stuff up and sending it in batches or something like that.
Yeah, that's fair. Did iBuffered logger take an array or a span or something, or just onesies?
An array, I think, like a chunk of logs.
It
Okay,
takes-
so it makes total sense as a general purpose flush all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah. It's also the case that iBuffered logger is that's a type that probably very few people are ever going to see. Like it's
Yeah.
a low level implementation detail. So I doubt anyone, like even if we made a different naming decision here, I think there'd be very few people that would be like, why does this name not match that other name? Because they never see the other name.
That's true. All right, so this one should at least say buffering filter rules, filter rule, or log buffering filter rule. And maybe log circular buffering filter rule.
Okay, changed it to log buffering filter rule.
All right. Category level. All right, and all those, so we have setters on these. Is this again a binding issue? Configuration binding issue?
Yeah, probably yes, but I will check that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so if a log record matches any of these rules, it's kept in memory. And then we need some place to flush these buffers. Buffer manager.
Yes. Yeah, so we have this iBuffer manager, which I think we have to make public, like according to C# rules. But for users, we will be offering this iGlobal buffer manager, which is below. This is like a main entry point for users to use this, and it contains one method, flush.
So
But,
the buffered logger parameter is misspelled in that main function there, missing a G.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so iBuffer manager, that is a way too overreaching name. It is not a manager of all buffers. So
iLog buffering manager.
okay.
So what does it mean when NQ fails? Log it. When try NQ returns false, what do I do? What does the caller do?
Log normally.
Okay, so at that point, say, let me try and put it in the buffer. If it fails, I'm just gonna send it out.
Yeah.
So this is where the maximum log record size is enforced? It's just going to say this record is too big, I'm not going to queue it.
Not for size. I think since it's a circular buffer, we just remove entries from the beginning.
Okay. All right, and this could be a log entry. It has everything from
Yes. Again, yeah, it could be a log
Yep.
entry. Yeah.
I think that would be log entry of T state.
Either that, or we force this to a I read only list of like we did it for the sampler. Because what are you going to do inside of this? There's a cast in there that says T state as I read only list. Because that's the only thing we know how to do, what to do with a T state is to look at it as a list. So I would make this a log entry of I read only list of string comma object.
Yeah. One question here about like we exposing these interfaces. I mean, like, do we expect some other people is going to implement it, or it's just us who will do that?
Yeah, so I have usage examples below in this proposal, but users are supposed to use iGlobal buffer manager and inject it in constructor using dependency injection, for example. And from that, they can call flush method.
I think the way it is right now, a user could create their own buffer implementation, but it's probably unlikely that most users would do so. But in fact, I think there may have even been one commenter on this PR who said that he was making like his own buffering implementation. It wasn't clear whether he planned to use this interface or whether he was going fully custom. Anyway, I expect there'll be some small number of power users who want to like create custom buffering things.
Okay, and second question here is, we made those interfaces. I mean, like, it's the same question before about like, do we expect to extend this or not?
Oh, yeah, that's an interface.
Yeah.
I could definitely imagine the iGlobal buffer manager to be extended to have more overloads of flush or something.
It seems reasonable to me to make these abstract classes. I mean, following basically the same logic that we did above.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And it has to be two classes? I mean, can it be just one abstract class?
There's another thing derived off of iBuffer Manager that's different further below.
Okay.
Basically, depending on the kind of buffering you do, then you might have different operations as to what does it mean to flush. Like global is simple. There's just one big buffer and you flush all of it. But for requests, it's not so simple because you want to pick out, which request you want to flush.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about the request level buffering yet.
So wouldn't this just be, instead of log buffering manager, isn't this just log buffer? Like, you're not managing anything, you are the buffer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes maybe into like the implementation of like, is it actually a single buffer or is it multiple? But I think you're right, like you could say those details don't matter and conceptually you can pretend it's a single buffer.
Well, again, and buffering eliminates that. So if this is the log buffering.
But You just say I log buffer.
No, but you said it wasn't
Yeah.
an interface, so it's just log buffer.
Or right, yeah. Abstract class log buffer.
You add that and you flush it. Yeah.
And then we can ask, do we care about
think
try
it makes
enqueue versus
sense.
try buffer? But try enqueue is fine. So. People understand what enqueuing things into a buffer means. And were you expecting log entry to go ref or value here?
Well, so we're going to be serializing that thing into the buffer. So I guess it'd be a ref also. Yeah.
Fine by me.
Okay. Log buffer. Is the buffered logger necessary on every call? Wouldn't that be something that's provided at construction of the whatever we called it now, log buffer? Because conceivably all this does is it copies stuff into memory. And then later is going to flush it out to the buffered logger.
So I think you get a couple different things here. One is it was probably constructed like back when we were creating the DI container.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily have the sync in existence at that time. So one is a timing issue. The other one is I believe that iBuffered logger is category specific. Like that's because we in the iLogger factory implementation, we have loggers per category. And so it's saying this is the particular buffered logger sync that will handle this category of message. So it's not going to be the same reference passed for every log message. I mean, there are potentially ways to do it that would get it out of this call and move it somewhere else, but it's not quite as simple as just saying, here's the one and only backing logger and set it when you construct the thing.
So the code that's going to call try enqueue is the logging provider. That it?
It's the logger, like the implementation details of the logger factory.
Logger factory, okay. So it's going to need to have a list of buffered loggers somehow, or a map of buffered loggers that it's going to pick based on the category?
Yep. I mean, it already has a list of loggers today. And so
I guess I don't understand why there's different. The buffered loggers are just buffered logger has just one function on it, which is log records, and it takes an array of buffered logs, of buffered log records. So why would you need many of those? I don't. What's the?
the pattern, like on log provider, you create multiple loggers from the log provider per category, and then
Yeah, but we're not. All this kind of filtering. The reason you do this is for filtering and all these different options. They don't exist for buffered logs. I think you only need one of those. It's the everything's been filtered, been processed, and we're just dumping at that point.
I mean, we haven't given it to log provider yet, and log provider expects it to be input through different iLogger instances that it gave out. You could resort it a second time. That's an option.
So
I don't know. I mean, maybe we take this offline. This is getting a little more like a, implementation details of the feature kind of question.
well, I mean, so I have the what I think is the practical question, or the underlying question, which is, why do you need this at the time of enqueuing? Are you storing the tuple of the message and which logger to send it to when you call flush?
I believe that is the current implementation. Yeah.
Okay, so you're You're keeping it partitioned here for delayed dispatch.
Yep.
Okay. Because if that's the case, then you need it here.
Yeah, I mean,
but to me, it felt more like a thing at flush.
Like there are other possible implementations that could move that parameter off this method and get it stored elsewhere and maybe reduce it down to one rather than multiple. But the current implementation definitely needs it.
Okay, so can we just put an asterisk next to that and look at it later?
Yep. So we have 5 minutes left. We can maybe look at the next type, or we can say this is where we pick up next time.
How about after 2 hours here, let's pick up next time. I recommend.
Okay.
Fine by me.
Okay. So I've only included what we've talked about so far, but I guess I could grab the other types. Which is this and this. This and this. Okay. So sampling parameters turned into log entry, probability turned into probabilistic. We got rid of the delegate overload to add sampler. There are questions about the options types and are they consistent with the rest of the options types. Changed to pass by reference. Added some ings instead of some ers. I slapped event name after event ID everywhere. If I got it backwards, flip it. The comment about global buffering and multiple people haven't understood it, so maybe we need a better name here. And then the changes we made in iBuffer manager, which is now called log buffer.
Would it be useful to update this issue with all these changes up to date?
What I have here is all these changes included.
Oh, okay, it's
so
already done.
Up until this line.
Okay, perfect.
So this will get marked as needs work because we didn't finish and it has to have a conclusion, but I'll go ahead and pop it back to review after the notes are published.
Looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody, especially chat and double in particular anybody who shared my confusion to make me feel like I wasn't alone and stupid. And
Thanks all. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. And yep, so since this is still blocking, I assume it'll come back early in next week where we'll once again see if anybody's here to represent the memory cache issue. And then hopefully move on to some other new and exciting things. So see you all on our same .NET time, on our same .NET channel, and thanks for joining. Auf Wiedersehen.